Now let's bring in Glenn Greenwald from Salon.com, who calls Israel's actions, quote, heinous and repugnant. And well, let me just ask you, you have ships approaching Gaza, controlled by Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Israel did, I don't think this is disputed, offer to have the ships inspected if there was no contraband on board, let the ships continue on to Gaza. Why was that not a reasonable offer, and why can Israel not intercede to stop the flow of contraband?
Well, first of all, international waters, which is where this ship was, is not owned by Israel. It is a crime, a war crime, to attack a ship in international waters that is not engaged in any aggression. And no one claims that these ships were. I mean, what you're describing is absolute anarchy, that any country can just say, no ships can go here, and if you disobey our order, we're going to attack you, board your ship forcefully, and kill anybody who doesn't resist.
Well,
Secondly, let me just finish, because you just had on 10 minutes of uninterrupted pro-Israeli propaganda filled with falsehoods. The blockade is one of the most brutal and inhumane blockades we've seen in the last generation. Look at UN reports that are objective, not Netanyahu aides, that say that 60% of the babies in Palestine have anemia, 65% of the population is food insecure. The entire Palestinian economy has collapsed as a result of this blockade. Israel routinely refuses to permit all sorts of imports, including food, chocolate, French fries, anything but the barest necessities to keep those prisoners, which is what they are.
Glenn, let me just, I hear, Glenn, hold on just one second. Let's go back. Ruth Wedgwood, who was really a top-flight intellect and scholar of international law, said that nations that are at war are permitted in international water to enforce a blockade and to check to see if contraband is on board. Now, nobody has said that Israel has prevented humanitarian materials to flow through to Gaza. You may be saying there's not enough.
I just said that. The UN has said that. Well, everybody says that. Israel constantly prevents humanitarian aid from going through to Gaza, and that's why this claim of, oh, you just give us the cargo and we'll take care of it for you is an absolute and absurd joke. For the last 3 years, the Israeli Prime Minister's aide, top aide, when the blockade was first imposed, said the purpose is to put the Palestinians on a diet. That's what the Israeli Prime Minister's top aide said about the reason this blockade was instituted. It is a completely inhumane blockade that is starving the people of Palestine, as the UN says, not as I say or Hamas says or as you say or as Netanyahu aides say. Look at the objective reports
can we go back
about what's happening to the people in that population.
Let's step back 1 second. Let's see if we can agree on one thing. Is Hamas, in your view, a terrorist organization?
Hamas is the democratically elected leadership of the people in Gaza, and they're recognized in fair and free elections as having been elected by everybody across the world. So that's what they are. Have they engaged in terrorism? Yes. Did the Israelis who founded the Israeli government and the Israeli state engage in terrorism? Yes, they have. Turkey says that what Israel just did is an act of terrorism itself. But Hamas is the democratically elected government of the Gaza Strip and is the chosen government to be represented. Has Israel been brutally occupying the Palestinian people for the last 40 years? Have they or haven't they?
Does it affect your analysis that Hamas...
They have.
Glenn, hold on a second. Does it affect your analysis that Hamas has as its stated policy the destruction of the state of Israel? And in fact, Egypt as well is blockading Gaza and Hamas because Egypt as well views Hamas as a terrorist organization. So both Israel and Egypt here are agreeing that only humanitarian materials should go through, and both have a stated objective to prevent war material from going through over this border by land or by sea. So
what you're referring to is the Egyptian dictator that is the leading recipient of U.S. aid, several billion dollars a year, right after the Israelis. So yes, the Israeli dictatorship, along with the Israeli government and their patrons in the United States, all agree that the people of Gaza should be suffocated and closed off into a prison. If you're going to cite the actions of the the Egyptian dictatorship as though that lends moral authority to this horrendous blockade, that's pretty bizarre. Now,
Glenn, in all fairness, I think, Glenn, I think what you also need to acknowledge is that Egypt is in form a democratic government as well, as is Israel, of course. And so when you say that alone,
as are the Gazans and Hamas.
Hamas Hamas has, again, let's get agreement where we can. Hamas has stated very clearly that it wants the destruction of Israel is what it seeks, and therefore it is rational for people to say they are trying to get armaments. They've been shelling into Israel for many, many years. So Israel has a legitimate reason in terms of self-defense to check to make sure that armaments are not flowing through with humanitarian resources. I assume you would agree with that.
Nobody ever claimed or thought until today that those ships had arms, and they didn't have arms. Not even the Israeli government claims they have arms. Everybody knew that the purpose of that flotilla was to try and deliver humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people, which is not being allowed to pass through by the Israeli government, as a means of dramatizing what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians. That was the entire purpose of that flotilla. Nobody ever claimed, oh, this is a terrorist organization trying to deliver arms. That is an absolute after-the-fact lie, and the entire world knows it.
Okay,
and I think what's so interesting is you can have as many Netanyahu aides on your show as you want, but the entire world outside of the United States is condemning Israel. Democracies and dictatorships all over the world doing so.
Glenn, look, I appreciate your participating. I think there are starkly divergent views here about both the morality and the legality of what we are seeing. I think to a certain extent you assume your conclusion when you say there are only humanitarian material are on those ships. That is precisely what the Israeli government says it wants to verify.